I should like, on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen and of the entire British people, to express our thanks, admiration, affection, and good wishes. We shall not forget you, and we shall watch with the closest interest as you embark on this new era of your remarkable history.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to episode 7 of Dragon's Gate. It's been quite a while since I've done a voiceover and uploaded a video. I've had a lot of things going on the past few months, and combine that with scrapping this entire episode twice before I recorded this final version, and suddenly it's been a few months without uploading. But I'm still here, and I'm still loving this project. So I'll go ahead and do the YouTuber thing and ask you to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, give the video a like, and all that stuff, because that helps the channel grow and helps keep me motivated to continue to put out these videos. Actually, I'd still probably continue to upload these videos because I enjoy it so much, but it really does help when you have people watching and also enjoying it with you. Anyways, for this video, I planned on starting the central business district of Xiangnan, and that is what I do, but I only get about a block of it done because I had this absolutely insane idea for an indoor mall with a metro station and other mixed uses. Initially, I got the idea from what is a real-life location in Shenzhen called Coco Park, and that's adjacent to the Ping An Financial Center, the 4th tallest building in the world, and that's actually what I based a previous version of this on that I ended up scrapping. It didn't feel right, and so I started it again from scratch. This final version is something that's heavily based on an architectural rendering for a district redevelopment in Shenzhen, where there would be this huge open-air mixed-use building with shops and a metro station and various offices. And I also really wanted to challenge myself with procedural objects, and I wanted to create some sort of large indoor space. That part of it was inspired by something Design Candy made in his collaboration with Prez in Columbia City. He made this huge mega shopping mall, and there was this area in the middle that he detailed quite nicely and covered it with glass, and I thought it was pretty cool, so I wanted to do something similar, except I'm me and I have to go crazy and make things way too complicated with a couple thousand procedural objects and a lot of headache. But starting out, you saw me place some of these futuristic blocks made by Teldero? Teldero? I don't know how to say your name, my guy, I'm sorry. And behind that, I place a metro station that I lower into the ground, and I end up changing this station out to one made by Titan in his modular station project, and I think it just works a lot better. And almost all of this building is made from procedural objects, and the only way it's going to function is with the block service cubes. And so there has to be a road network, and I have to hide it so that everything has road access, but it still can't be seen. The only vehicles that can access these roads are service vehicles and delivery vehicles. There's no cars or anything like that allowed, no buses or anything, and I won't go too deep into how all of that works because of time. But basically, as we go forward, there are roads behind everything that you can't see to make everything functional. And I start off with this lowest level next to the metro station, and I put down some shops, but they will only end up functioning as offices since their road access is a pavement road between them and the metro station, and I didn't want any sort of vehicle traffic down there, and commercial buildings always need deliveries and that kind of stuff. And getting things perfectly symmetrical in this particular build was incredibly difficult, and it was almost impossible, so I move things around a lot and constantly just to make sure it's at least somewhat symmetrical. Then I put up a wall to surround the lower area and start working on the tunnel entrances for the metro trains. It was really simple, just a matter of making a box with some Ronix expressway pillars, a retaining wall, and for the top of it I used a Ronix dock surface. And when I had it in place, I just copied it to the other side. It's really simple. And after that, I move up to the second level and place more of the shops that I put on the first level. Except for these will actually function as commercial shops when I put down the block service cubes later on. And I end up covering them up with these concrete surfaces that will form the bottom surface of the top third level. And I wanted the third level to be the same height as the pedestrian bridge that I made off camera. And that bridge is coming from the transport hub park area, so I end up having to lower the path a little bit and have to make it slope back up to the park because this small area is a little bit lower. But once I had a baseline for all of the different levels down, I noticed there was quite a large gap between the metro level and the second level. So I took another one of these office buildings and used procedural objects to get rid of a lot of the extra stuff so that it's just basically windows. And I used it to make a false level with no actual function or access in the game. But in the story of the series, it probably is just more offices. And then I just kind of mess around with the bottom level a bit and use this archway as a primary entrance to the lower level. And I come back to this later when I start adding all the different pathways around the structure. So for this next part, I needed to figure out the overall shape of the building. Originally, it was going to be just a simple rectangle, but of course, there's a main road in the way. And I couldn't really move the road, and I also couldn't make the building itself smaller, so I literally had to cut corners. I cut off the corner where it would have gone over the road, but looking at the finished result, it actually looks a lot more appealing than just the simple rectangle. But to find out how the layout was going to work, I took more of these concrete surfaces on the third level, and first thing I did was I made that rectangle, and then I deleted the corner piece over the road and lined up the surfaces parallel to the road after that. Then once I had the shape of the building, the next problem I dealt with was, what am I even going to put on the third level? And the answer to that was I put even more shops that are accessed by pedestrian paths. Again, it took some fiddling around with different PO buildings to figure out how exactly I wanted it done, but I just took this small row of shops and made the building a little bit taller so that it would fit under the ceiling with no gap. And I copied it a couple of times to make sure it would work, but then before I went wild putting the shops everywhere on the third level, I needed to make a test facade for the building just so I can get a real feel for how this thing would turn out. To do that, I once again turned to Ronix's amazing expressway pillars. I used procedural objects to make them white and added some glass between the beams, and then I used these rods or poles, not really sure what pack they're a part of, and used them as window mullions. And then I'd take another concrete slab, turn it into PO, turn it white, and use it as the roof with another glass surface for natural lighting in the outer shop corridor. Then it was just a matter of creating a couple of different variations of that so I could use it to copy and paste around the entire building to make the exterior. That itself took a huge amount of time because sometimes things didn't line up properly and there was extra space in the corners where I had to make a unique window that was either a little bit longer or a little bit shorter than the normal ones. But at the end of it, after copying and pasting it all over, most of the exterior walls were complete and I didn't have to adjust much afterwards. After I have the main exterior walls complete, I take a moment to cover the rest of the second level with pavement surface networks so I can place decals and props on them later. And I create the outline of the centerpiece bridge that we will have, but we're going to come back to this later on, because I quickly start to realize that before I go too far with placing surface networks, I actually need to create the invisible road backbone of the complex. So first thing I do with that is I add all of the procedural objects to a layer and turn them off so I can more easily see where I'm putting these roads. And then I start with a main 4-lane road that leads directly into the large office blocks on the side facing the city center. And after that I go around placing invisible roads inside of all the actual buildings. Again, this is for functionality later on. Not much use of a custom building like this if it's not functional. As far as realism, the 4-lane road would likely lead to an underground area that separates workers and residential cars, as well as delivery and service vehicles, leading to the use of a 4-lane road entering and exiting the complex. But I don't want any passenger cars and such to be able to reach the functional buildings because I want everyone to use pedestrian paths. So I use Traffic Manager to ban a bunch of vehicles, and then I go and edit the lane connections on the entrances and the exits because I only want cars to be turning a certain way going out onto the main roads. Once I have all of the roads done and the second level is properly covered with pavement, I turn my attention back to adding buildings to the structure. The first one is this large skyscraper that matches the futuristic blocks, and I use procedural objects and I remove the sign on the top of that building, and then I place it 4 times on the office block side of the complex. And on the 2 that I place in the middle, I make them quite a bit shorter. After that, I finish adding the shop rows to the 3rd level, and I leave a gap between them at the slight angle where I had to cut the corner, and I'll use that as another way for pedestrians to be able to reach the outer corridor of the shops. Then I start putting down all the main pedestrian paths throughout the complex. Earlier, off camera, I created these 2 places, this kind of like an elevator that would actually just be a pedestrian path leading straight down. But I had trouble making it work with a lower level because it would always default to making a tunnel even though I was forcing it to be elevated or surface. Eventually I got it working, but it was kind of annoying. But as far as these elevator shafts go, later on I completely revamped them, but unfortunately the footage got corrupted due to a blue screen. Thankfully though, I had a save a few minutes before, so I didn't lose any actual progress. Anyways, after I got all of the paths in, I turn off the PO layer again and start adding various block service cubes. Most of them are commercial, but the ones on the lowest level are offices like I said before, and actually inside the large office block, I actually use it for residential cubes because we need a bit more population in the city, so it will start to come alive more. And going back to this pedestrian bridge, I'm stealing an idea from, I think it's Acruis who made a bridge using these smokestack buildings. And I made it into PO, and it works so well with this build. And later off camera, I add 2 other smaller bridges on the 2nd level, but they don't seem to be used as often by the Sims. At this point, it's time to start putting in some details. The first detail I start with is decals on the mid-level going around the railings overlooking the lower level. And I use a combination of different brick decals, copied and pasted a lot, and I still deal with the old issue of the decal not being quite rotated properly, so I have to go back and fix that so that there isn't any gap at the ends of the copy and paste line, essentially. It was also kind of annoying how the decals would bleed onto the railing networks, but that's just the nature of how networks work in this game. By the way, the railing I put in off camera is one from the decorative network pack made by City Wall. It has this white diamond shaped network and I thought it fit really well as a sort of railing here. Then after I get all those decals in the middle of the open space between the entrance and the railing, I took out a few of the decals and put in a square of different brick and tile decals, which I will detail later on with some trees and lights and such. And not to like quickly overlook it, but I also added some pavement networks to the third level, which I decided not to add any decals up there for the sake of prop count and also my own sanity. Once all of that was done, I still felt like the building wasn't tall enough for how wide and how long it was. And I also knew that if I kept it at the height that it would be a little bit more difficult to record cinematics. And so I just decided to add one extra level. This is basically just a non-functional dummy level as far as the game itself is concerned. Again, mostly because I could go as detailed as I want, but I think I have to set a boundary somewhere because this building is already an FPS killer. But you saw me just use the glass surfaces as a sort of guideline, and then I put in all of the horizontal beams of the new upper level, and then it was just another matter of copying and pasting the window sets that I made earlier. The difference is this time that I also needed to make an interior set of windows. But before I could make these interior windows, I needed to set up what would be the floor of that level. And for that I just used more of these concrete surfaces and procedural objects, and I changed the color so that it was very close to the color of the concrete pavement in the actual map theme. I needed to use these surfaces instead of pavement networks for a couple of reasons. The first one is kind of practical. This building is so filled with networks that it would have just been a huge pain to edit even more nodes. And the second reason is that the pavement networks, or at least the ones that I was using at this time, they didn't have textures on the bottom side, which isn't very useful for cinematics. After I put the upper level floor in, I added the interior windows, and the upper level still seemed like it needed some more structural support over the entrances, and so I spent some time messing with the pillars to give it all some more support. And that actually ended up leaving a bunch of gaps in the third level, and so I just fixed that with even more windows. At this point, this is where a lot of footage got corrupted, unfortunately, and I ended up remaking these elevators and the side entrance from the Central Park area. And it's mostly just a lot of work with the pillars and those office buildings that I used for the windows and even more windows. But we picked back up where I am adding the pillars to the interior of the entrance that goes out to the Central Park. At first, I put these pillars slightly off the wall, but then I decided to just make them flush against the wall because it honestly just looked better. Eventually, I reached the exterior of it, and I had to make the actual entryway to the building. And it's super simple, it's not special or anything, it's just more pillars and windows. However, I had to transition from the pedestrian bridge to the actual width of the entryway. So at first I used these city wall decorative networks on the actual sides of what I was going to make, but later I get rid of them because they're just too thick for this bridge transition. In between those, I PO'd another one of those concrete surfaces and I covered it with ploppable pavement and added some pillars to the bottom, some different pillars to the bottom. Now with just about everything structural minus the roof built, we can get down into the detailing. Like I said before, I don't want to go overly crazy with this, so I kind of just start out with creating some planters. I just PO a landscaping block and I paste it all around the building at various intervals. And then in each one I put a different combination of 2 trees or bushes. Back in the middle of that decal square that I made earlier, I add a couple of palm trees and some bushes, and I replaced the large decal at the bottom with some grass. And then it was on to the lighting. The first lights I added were some downward lights in the upper level, and then pretty much everywhere else I used these lights that have 3 lamps on them. I was debating about these because they may be a little bit too bright, but after I put them all down, I thought it was fine. After the lights, I put in these 2 large Chinese flags over the elevator shafts, and then I start putting billboards all over. And for the entrance with the widest area of windows, I added the Chinese brands to the very top level and all the other brands down below because I feel like that's something that they would do. And then I went crazy and put smaller Chinese flag banners on pretty much all of the pillars, and on the upper level inside of the windows I added some sort of what is called propaganda or something, but I can't read Chinese, so for all I know it could say turtles love tacos or something. Then finally it was on to covering it all with a roof. Like I said before, I'm just using these concrete surfaces as procedural objects, and I made them white, and then I just go and make a general outline before I move on to building the skylights. The skylights are my absolute favorite part of the build, and I love how they turned out. First, I just made a square with the pillars, and then inside of that I took another one of the pillars and made it really skinny and copied it a bunch of times in the middle so that they look kind of like slats or something. And then I simply PO'd some glass in the middle and copied and pasted all a few times randomly all over the building. I would like to say this is the easiest part of the build, but it really wasn't because I kept having to align the heights, and then the glass would go up above the square, and I just kept having to adjust everything a lot for every single one I copied. But once I had everything aligned, all I had to do was fill in the gaps with more of the concrete surfaces, and then you have a roof. Now, finally, it's time to start detailing the exterior. I started with an outer pedestrian path around the whole building, and on the side facing the Central Park, I had a row of trees, that's something that's become pretty standard for this city. Then I move on to where the 4-lane road enters the building, and I make an entrance for it. I use these prefab concrete walls, and I place one in the middle, and I color it black so it doesn't seem like vehicles are coming through a building or a concrete wall. And then I add a couple of pillars on the side and fill the space beside it with some trees before I copy the entrance to the other side as well. Back at the front of the building, inside the doorways, I put a few office block service cubes, and I make sure there's a pedestrian path that leads to them. They do have road access via the 4-way road or the 4-lane road, but the cars are banned, so most people will have to access it via the pathways anyways. Then I move on to one of the main entrances on the side of the building, and I definitely wanted to have some sort of like curves going on, so I used these hedge props to make a sort of outline, and I filled the space in between them with concrete. In the corner adjacent to the intersection, I wanted to have a sign, so I ended up using this Chinese 70th anniversary sign. And at first I had it held up by a vanilla bridge pillar that I turned into procedural objects, but my game crashed and I had to redo it, and I changed my mind and I ended up using those prefab concrete walls again. And then on the pavement, I experimented with different designs of decals and even a weird design using white curbs sunken to be flush with the ground. But in the end, I decided to leave it blank and just make some planters instead. Along the outside of the paved area, I ended up using a planter with 2 cypress trees in it, and then along the actual pathways, I used a square planter, and I used a tree from the generic tree pack. And then I just added some more Chinese flags along the side of the road and put in some lighting, and that entrance was pretty much done. Then I continued on the back side with another curved row of hedges that spanned all the way to the other main side entrance. And I also put another smaller curved row of hedges in the corner on the back side. And then I just used some more of those cypress tree planters along all of the perimeter. After that, I created a series of grassy curbs with smaller bushes and a few trees on them, with pedestrian paths breaking them up at regular intervals. Then I continued with the trees inside of the row of hedges that I made with some larger bushes and trees and a few palm trees, and Then I added another 70th anniversary sign on the opposite intersection as from the one before. At this point, I felt like the roof of the building was missing something, so I decided to put a small area where people could walk out onto the roof. And this is for now entirely aesthetic, but I may go back later and make it functional. I'm not really sure yet. I start with grass networks on the outside perimeter of the roof. There is this little space where the upper level beams are slightly higher than the roof, and so that is where all of this grass and paths and all this stuff will go. After the grass, I put in the concrete paths. They're straight lines, they're not curved or anything exciting, but they're placed closer to the outside of the perimeter. And then outside of the path are some more smaller bushes, but inside of the path are larger bushes, and along the path itself there are a few spaced out juniper trees. After I was happy with the roof, I had a ton of the decorative lighting on the outside, and I continued the theme of the pink and cyan or the magenta and the turquoise, whatever color they are, as if there's that special occasion in the city. I still don't know what that special occasion is, but there's a special occasion going on in the city. And the very last thing I do after I go around and making sure everything was properly lit up with lights and all of that is I add some of these fans from the dual nuclear power plant pack to the tops of the darker buildings as a way to cover up that little gap that they had that was in the middle that you could see down and see some of the block service cubes. But that pretty much wraps up this build. Like I said at the beginning, this was a huge challenge, but I think the results speak for themselves. I probably won't be doing another project like this on this side of the city, but I do have some crazy ideas for later on farther out from the city center. There's a lot of footage that I left out of this video for the sake of time, but if you're interested, I'm actually open to making a time-lapse only episode with just some music in the background. If that's something you're interested in, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, if you enjoyed this episode, leave a comment anyways, because I love engaging with the people that watch my videos. That's the biggest motivation I have other than my love of playing this game anyways. And as always, I'll ask you to leave a like and subscribe with the notification bell turned on so you'll be notified when I upload, because right now I don't really have a schedule, so I won't be uploading at a consistent time. Also, if you want, you can follow and reach out on my other social platforms. Twitter is probably the easiest way to stay updated, but I do post on Instagram and Reddit as well. But thanks everybody for watching, and I hope to see you in episode 8 of Dragon's Gate.